Young adults are struggling. How and why? This week on the Ohio Guidestone Let's Talk About It podcast, we dive into it. I'm here with Justin Hovorka. And Justin, did I get that right?
You did.
Okay. I've worked with Justin here for about a couple of years, so I was really excited to have you on today, especially with this topic, talking about some of the unique obstacles that come with being a young adult. I guess I'll jump into things, Justin. When you think about young adults today, what stands out as the biggest mental health challenge?
Probably the increasing number of expectations that are put on younger kids moving into the young adult age, and the speed you're supposed to do things, the amount, kind of what goes with speed, but the efficiency you're supposed to do, all these different things, and all the, how much you're supposed to be an expert in.
And I remember myself, being in my late teens, early 20s, there was a lot of pressure to figure it out. Where do you see that showing up the most? Getting the car, getting the house, getting married younger and younger and younger, and supposed to, be as independent as possible without anyone's help. And if you don't, then that's somehow a weakness or a dig. Right. And I think too, with a lot of younger folks, there's a lot of folks that feel everyone else is doing better than they are, right? And I think that's probably the social media influence. But what's really going on there? I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head with the social media piece. How often are people, logging into whatever different app, seeing what someone they, maybe graduated that high school or college with, where they're at, what job they have, what, different, items they have, accomplishments they've made, and say, well, that's not me. I haven't crossed off all those same boxes they have. So I must, be failing. So for someone that feels stuck or left behind, what's something important for them to understand about that feeling? That it's okay, and it's not necessarily feeling stuck. It's okay to be where you are at in your life, and there are a lot of successes you're having, and it doesn't have to match anybody else. And I think a lot, again, I go back to myself, as a young person, and had a ton of anxieties about the future and what direction I want to go. There's just so many complex moving parts and pieces. When you talk about anxiety in the future, what does that typically look like for young adults today? The anxiety is for different, or people have anxiety from different things than maybe, years ago. What does that look like? I think that's a really, tough question. And again, linked to social media, the expectations put on by, whether it's, people that they're influenced by on social media or things like that. At what point does normal stress become something more concerning? When it starts to affect you on a day-to-day basis, affect your normal routine. For someone that age, maybe it's, if you're in school, maybe it's skipping class. Maybe it's talking to folks less that you're normally communicating with, or maybe it's losing, interest in normal hobbies that you have. Like, I'm just going to stay in today. I had this scheduled, but I'm gonna cancel. I'm gonna rain check for whatever reason I can kind of make up on the spot. So in your experience, what are some early signs that someone might need more support, even if they're still functioning day to day, showing up for class or work? What does that look like? I think sometimes being proactive is actually the better way to get to that. Instead of waiting for something to happen, noticing some signs when maybe it's too late and things have kind of dug in, normalizing that in discussion, like if it's between friends or if it's between family members, normalizing asking how people are doing, and not just being accepting I'm doing good, doing fine, everything's great. Saying, no, really, like, how are things going? I'm interested. Like, let's talk about it a little bit. Yeah. My mom always said, you never know what
anyone's going through, especially young adults. You know, they all have their own private battles that they're fighting every single day, but they also want to seem normal, right? What are some simple things that young adults can do to start getting out of that overwhelmed feeling and really be proactive, as you said?
Yeah. I think it's getting used to being proud of what the things you're accomplishing, even if it's on a daily basis, staying positive with yourself. And, for me specifically, not necessarily for everyone, but for me is staying active, having a positive way to, use that energy, even if it's been, a more, difficult day. I've been going through some things, like staying active, not necessarily, removing myself from everything else that I like to do.
If you could sit down with your own self at 22, what would you say about mental health?
Where would that put me? That would put me number of years ago, finishing up undergrad in college. You said sit down with myself, and
if you could sit down with yourself at 22, what would you say about mental health?
Mental health. It'd be different than my view today after doing what I've been doing for a little while. I would probably tell that person that, kind of reiterating what I had said prior in our conversation, of the things I've accomplished are good. And with now graduating college, moving into this next phase, you don't have to heap a ton of pressure on yourself. It's good to have maybe some expectations for yourself and some goals, but remain positive with it and don't put too much pressure to make my life look like someone else, the person that I graduated next to me, or my parents and where they were at that age, or my grandparents, or anything like that.
And, talking about big milestones, I think of college graduation, high school graduation, those milestones in your life. Sometimes folks say that those same milestones make people feel worse instead of better. Why is that?
Because it's the end of maybe something that went really well. And it's the uncertainty of what's coming next. Maybe you just got through a stint of a high school or college where everything went well. You got great grades, you had a lot of friends, and that next level is uncertain. Maybe you're going from high school to college where you've been, a hometown kid, and now you're moving further away. Or maybe same thing with college. Maybe you've been away for a while and you're coming home. And it's because it's such a big milestone into the next phase of life that feels a lot of pressure and a lot of anxiety about what's next.
So in your experience, what's one small decision that can change someone's trajectory more than they realize?
I'll use an example from high school to college, and maybe the decision of whether to even go or not. A lot of folks I've heard from say, I wish I would have started this sooner. Or I've even heard the reverse of, I wish I hadn't chosen to do that and got went a different path, maybe not college, but understanding that, whether you were necessarily happy with that decision or not, like looking back on that's okay. You got a lot from whatever you had gone through at that time, and whatever decision you made, you got positive things from that. Because, yes, if everyone had a time machine, sure, you go back, we'd all make changes in something that we did. Right. But kind of reframing what that decision was and looking for the positives in that and how you've used that where you're at now.
And to backpedal a little bit, you talked about consistency as a young adult and being proactive. When we talked about that, a lot of young adults aren't consistent and they're not proactive. And I'm guilty as charged. I was one of those. How does lack of routine or structure impact mental health?
I think different people need different levels of routine. I think different people figure that out sooner than later. So how does that impact mental health? I think the folks that really need a heavy routine, hopefully they have people in their corner or they find that support and help them realize that before it gets to something that, like we talked about earlier, if it's really affecting your day to day and your ability to be successful. For others, being able to, not have such a rigid schedule, and they have some flexibility here and there, that helps their mental health and their anxiety and reducing and knowing, I'm organized enough to get this done tomorrow, and I need to put it off for today. And some people putting that pressure on themselves to do the 10, 15 things every single day, every single time perfect, that can cause anxiety. So it really depends who you are.
I really like that. And as you know, Justin, I've got 3 little ones. Well, they're not so little anymore. My oldest is 16. My twins are 12. But they don't open up, right? You ask about their day, you get a two-word answer. It's fine, right? And then they're in their room or out with their friends. What is something that a parent or a mentor can? How do you reach those folks and say, how are you really doing, and get them to talk?
For especially with kids that if they're at that younger age, but even into, the high school, even into college age, young adult age, try and catch them and have these conversations when you're doing something that they are into.
Okay.
With the real young kids, we talk, you talk about play therapy and, okay, if we're going to get a kid to open up, we're going to start playing a game and then weave it in. But even as you get older, maybe it's, for me, I'll use baseball reference. Baseball
Absolutely.
guy, right? Playing catch, a lot easier to just, we're playing catch. And then, all of a sudden now we're talking about our day. And it doesn't seem as, sitting, right across, it's not like sitting with my dad right across the, the dinner table. And it's just like, okay, tell me about your day. You loosen up a little bit when you're doing something else that you really, or your kid really enjoys.
So keep it organic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I'm definitely going to try that. I'm realizing my earlier method of just asking is not, blunt instruments are not working there.
Yep.
So how does something like stress in young adults become something more serious, like anxiety or depression? And how do they know that? What are the signs to look for?
When it goes unchecked, obviously, when that goes with anything, you leave, something minor, with your house unchecked, it's going to turn to a bigger problem with that foundation. With stress and the signs, it's not participating in those activities. Maybe it's, more easily agitated, lashing out about things that typically were like, whoa, I was just wondering, just asking, how you're doing or how that test went. So, definitely a difference, you would see in that person's, attitude or, their typical behavior.
So I want to circle back to social media and the impact that it has. I've talked a lot with folks like yourself that have really been on the front lines of this and the impacts of that. And some of what I've read and just talking to folks is that it really makes young people feel like they're on an island. In your experience, how does that loneliness or that effect show up in young adults?
Sure. I'm going to take it even one step back and trying to relate to it. When I was high school age, start social media, some of the new apps were coming. There was new forms of technology, and there was this, kind of a accumulation factor. Like, I need to get this app. I need to download this one. I need to have this number on this app and this. And that's what you start to think. Where I'm at now, I'm the opposite. I'm like, can I get rid of this app and still like have a connection with my family and still, check in on them and see, which is a completely healthy thing. So to get to the point of, how does that have an effect? It's the expectations that you put on yourself by being on all these apps. Now you're associating yourself with a number, and you're associating yourself with how many apps do I have and how many different ways am I, getting clicks and seeing things. And so all of a sudden you're just consumed in just that, and you're isolated. And, I've heard the term come out before that, social media is not real, or specifically like, Twitter is not real. Like what you read on there in the comments on there, it's, you can get easily sucked into that and think all of that is reality. And sometimes it's much more healthy to, take a pause from that and talk to someone in person, in real life about, whatever it is those are, going and doing something kind of, I like the term used, organic with those same people, and not have it all be on social media and just get completely drawn to that, world of technology.
And when is it time to stop trying to handle that alone and reach out for help?
Maybe when you are, and sometimes, when you're younger, it's harder to see this, but how much time you're spending. One of the features I like that they have on phones is how many hours you've spent on certain apps throughout the week. And sometimes even my guilty thing right now is YouTube. So I'll go down YouTube rabbit holes, watch, podcasts, things like that. And I'm like, wow, I was up 3 hours this week from last week in that.
Yeah.
And so sometimes, it's having that self-acknowledgement of that, or if you're a friend of someone that you've noticed is really getting into maybe unhealthy, levels of using social media, or they're consistently on there, or they're posting stuff that's not really, the best. Maybe, as a young adult in your friend group, maybe you're that person that kind of points it out. Sometimes it takes self-reflection. It really does. And that's when we talk about pressure and anxiety, there's not a set time clock of when you have to realize that, when you get to that point where you have that self-realization, but at some point you'd want to get there and know when enough is enough.
I think self-help is not a straight line.
Mm-mm.
And I also think that when we talk about scrolling endlessly, I can also relate.
Mm-hmm.
I believe the unclinical version of that, they call it doom scrolling.
Doom scrolling. That's as clinical as it needs to be, because everyone knows exactly what it's talking about.
They do, and they know all the things that I am interested in. I never knew that I wanted to build a bunker in my backyard with a wood-burning stove.
But they did somehow.
I don't know how.
Before you did.
Right. As we talk about some of the, for lack of a better explanation, slings and arrows of being a young adult, for some young folks, why does it feel like everyone around you is getting engaged, promoted, moving forward, and you're just trying to keep up mentally?
Because that's what's happening. Especially when you're in, I don't know, I don't want to put an exact age on it, but when you're in that young adulthood, maybe it's your 20s, maybe it's your early 30s, that's exactly what's happening. You have some friends that you grew up with that are, on their second or third kid. You have people that are still kind of, I don't know, going down to, whatever bar multiple days a week and hanging out, and that's fine. And that's where they're at. And you have other people that are going back to school for the second or third time. And people are in completely different walks of life. And that, again, like we had talked before, there's no timeline. That's okay. But it can definitely feel like maybe you're that person that's, going back to school, and this friend's got, kids in a house, and this one over here's just got promoted, and you feel like, am I wasting my time here? Is my timeline messed up? And you start to build this thing in your head of you're not doing enough, you're not accomplishing enough fast enough. And that's not true. That's not the case. You're where you're at, and your time, what you're doing right now, is valuable.
So what's happening internally when someone feels happy for others, but also discouraged about their own life and where they think they should be?
That sounds like a pretty genuine person to be able to put the anxiety and that aside, and feeling like they're not doing enough, but also congratulate others. There you go. So it's, what's going on inside is this huge, I think, kind of polarization where, most of the time when they're seeing all this, they're, maybe it is through social media congratulating people, but on the inside, they're like, gosh, every time I see one of these, it makes me question what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And that having that huge gap between those two things can, cause a lot of stress, especially even on a daily basis when we're talking about social media and this app and that app and these posts, it can be a daily occurrence where you're seeing folks where you may see yourself or want to be, and you're not there. And so it's this daily occurrence of, and a reminder that you're not where you want to be. And that's not healthy, because, you don't need to be where that person is. Right.
So how do you stay grounded when everyone around you seems to be moving sometimes faster, sometimes in different directions?
Yeah. We talk about this in the program that I'm working in at GuideStone right now is, surrounding yourself with that support system, in whatever ways necessary. A lot of times we talk about, wanting it to be, those people that are in your family, surrounding yourself with good family. If it is something formal, like seeking some form of support, like a formal support, absolutely, getting that in place as well if needed. But just making sure that you're supported and you're not. We talked about this with social media and how isolating it can be. Mm-hmm. Trying to combat that isolation. some of that is doing it yourself and, improving your practices, but sometimes you need help with that.
Right. And I like a lot what you said about accepting things for what they are and where you are. And so with that, though, what does it actually mean to be on your own timeline from a mental health perspective?
That there's not an expectation for you to be, a certain level of healthy mentally. Yes, we talked about if it's affecting your day-to-day routine, absolutely, you want to improve from that spot. But you being any sort of better mental status and trying to compare that to where someone else might be, you don't know what that person that's married or that person that just got the promotion, where they're at mentally with anything else going on in their life. So you need to really be able to focus on staying healthy within your own self and your own life, and making sure that you're all right.
And if someone listening right now who is in that place in life, they feel that they're not where they're supposed to be, what would you say to them?
If you're supposed to be where you're at right now, you're there in whatever spot for a reason, and where you're at is a good place to be. There are a lot of people, I think, that, had that, first maybe job out of college or first setup, and they, maybe you hated where you found a place to live and it wasn't where you wanted because you didn't have enough money at the time. Or that first job you got, you're like, I went to school and did all this and I got into something, got into a field that I don't like. So maybe you feel like you should be in a different place of work, or maybe you feel like, I just wasted the last 4 years, if you went and got your undergrad. And it's all for a reason. It's valuable. The job you're at now, you're taking something from it. I do hear often that, getting a job in the food industry teaches you tons of skills. Would a lot of people say, yes, my dream job, I'll use my example. My dream job is being a host at a restaurant. Maybe for some people, but for me, that was not my dream. But did I get a lot of valuable experience that I use in my job today from that? Absolutely.
I love that. Mm-hmm. My first job was a dishwasher at a Chinese restaurant. Mm-hmm. I got yelled at a lot, but I did learn the value of hard work. So I love that. Just absolutely take what you can and leave the rest, right? What's one message, Justin, that you would want every young adult to hear about their mental health right now?
Their mental health right now. It's okay to be where you're at right now. So not saying that that's where you want to be forever, but to not feel judgment about where you're at right now. So wherever that is, if you're in a good space, awesome. Do whatever you need to do to maintain that. Because how many, not even with mental health, with any sort of thing, how much is a roller coaster? Like, oh, I'm good on my diet this week and now I'm bad, and I'm good at my exercise. Same thing with mental health. A lot of people are in a good spot right now. For the folks that are not in a good spot right now, that's okay. Not the end of the world.
Yeah.
But to be able to reflect on that and be working towards, improving that. And if you're in a good spot right now, working towards maintaining that.
I love that. Mm-hmm. And as we wrap things up, I'm thinking about our listeners. And if someone right now who's listening is struggling silently right now, what is one thing that you hope they take away from our conversation today?
That there's no, and we talked about this before, that there is no set time or, goal that you have to hit by any certain marker in life. And focusing on, what's, you're successful in right now. And that kind of, I don't know, repeating what I said, but it's because I like that so much. And I use that for myself as well. It's okay where you're at right now.
Right.
If you're taking steps, if you're not in a spot that you're taking steps right now, that the belief that, it's going to happen at some point for you. So
that's a great answer. It's good to know that folks like you are out there on the front lines making a difference.
Yeah.
Justin, I want to thank you for being on the podcast today. This was an important conversation. If you're listening and feeling overwhelmed, you're not alone. please visit OhioGuidestone.org and get started today. I'm your host, Derek Rader. Thank you so much for listening. Have a great day because you deserve it.